Entry into the hidden history of the African American fighting man. You know, ladies and gentlemen, any African American who was found with a weapon, particularly a long gun, was considered a militant if he was not out hunting. Particularly if, in fact, he was a member of a gun club, like, let's see, Deacons for Defense, Bogalusa, Louisiana. There was no doubt about the fact that up until 1972, ladies and gentlemen, there were, as I indicated yesterday, most people had to have their guns registered, especially if you were African American. If you were caught with a gun and that was not registered, then it was you got a fine and or jail. If in fact you weren't killed, just having a gun as an African American in the 1950s and 60s was enough for law enforcement, particularly, to think that you were a threat to them, especially if the officer was Caucasian. So things changed. They changed during the Vietnam conflict. They really did. The whole concept of registering guns changed. One could argue why, or try to figure out why. Much of the reason is because Deacons for Defense in Bogalusa, Louisiana. It was organized in 1964. Men in Jonesboro, Louisiana, led by Ernest Chili Willie Thomas and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick. They founded the Deacons for Defense and Justice to protect members of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. These were the predecessors. The reason why they formulated this militia, as it would be called today, was because of the Klan violence, to be more particular. Most of the deacons were veterans of World War II and the Korean conflict. They were just getting home, had learned how to use both automatic and semi-automatic weapons, and of course the carbine M1. Brought some of them back, they did. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, registering guns became so very, very important with law enforcement, just to try to figure out what the Negroes had. I don't know whether it was the same in the Caucasian communities. If you were around back then, let me know whether or not there was this great haste to register Caucasian guns as it was in the African American community. Not only registering guns, but disarming. There were a significant number of African Americans who, in fact, had their guns taken away upon being found with a gun. They gave them an option, either go to jail or give us your gun. It was all part of Jim Crow. Nevertheless, these two men, veterans both, were pretty significant with pushing the envelope between Louisiana and Arizona, to the point whereby even the FBI had to step in and then do what they should have done with the terrorist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. The Deacons for Defense, Chili Willie, takes full credit for actually pushing the envelope, even more so than Martin Luther King Jr. You want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because the FBI realized that if, in fact, the Deacons for Defense of Bogalusa, Louisiana, were to inspire more organizations that they refer to as, get this, militant, like the Black Panther Party for Defense or Robert Williams, then actually you could have armed conflict in America. Up until the Deacons for Defense, ladies and gentlemen, J. Edgar Hoover was a little bit numb. He actually blamed the protesters who were protesting nonviolently. He actually blamed those individuals whose churches were being burned because their churches were being burned. It was okay as long as turnabout wasn't fair play. But the moment Negroes started arming themselves and defending themselves, everything changed. Speaking of that, actually we chatted with probably the sole African American who got away with shooting a police deputy. Actually the sheriff there, didn't he, Ro? Yeah. He shot the sheriff, Henry Austin, and never spent a day in jail. Why? That's right. Didn't spend a day in jail primarily because it was the sheriff who was being belligerent, and it was Austin who was defending himself. So once again, you see where, again, the African-American fighting man came back home and still had to fight, and was successful, I might add. I failed to mention Henry Kersey, maybe another time coming out of Jackson. He was an extraordinary guy. All right, folks, I want to get to this. I want to get to this only because no one else is going to deal with this the way I'm going to deal with it. We're seeing something permeating in our country that has been brewing for a long time, like a festering boil. And it has been Donald John that brought it to head. But by now, ladies and gentlemen, there's enough information and evidence to call it what it is, in my view, and we shall. I had a caller yesterday talking about the definition for terrorism, and I've said to him on many occasions what the definition is. As per the FBI, terrorism 2002-2005, FBI policy and guidelines, kind of spells it out. Starts with the definitions. Here's how it starts. There is no single universally accepted definition of terrorism. That's how it starts. This is how the FBI placed it. There is no single universal accepted definition of terrorism. Terrorism is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance, a lot of prepositional phrases, in furtherance of political or social objectives. Social objectives. Political or social objectives. What exactly are those? Anyone care to define what those are? I mean, if you please feel free. I looked for the social objectives definition. Hadn't found that yet, according to the FBI. But common sense should prevail. The FBI further describes terrorism as either domestic or international, depending on the origin, base, and objectives of the terrorist organization or terrorism. For the purpose of this report, the FBI will use the following definitions. So it spelled out specific guidelines here. It spells out what domestic terrorism is. It says this, let's see, foreign direction committed against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of a political or social objectives. All right, so let's just deal with this. There is plenty of evidence, ladies and gentlemen, what the social objectives are of, racial bigots. Caucasians are African Americans, but plenty of Caucasians. There is a history here, ladies and gentlemen. There is. And my only reason for bringing this up is because of what we're dealing with right now. And it should be. It is a terrorist attack in Vegas. He had, in fact, social objectives. Why do I say that? Well, because he chose to go to the country western concert and open fire. Well, he didn't go. He chose that as a perch. Around him at the Luxor, the Blue Men were performing. And I'm going to tell you something. Once the Luxor lets out, you're looking at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, maybe even 5,000 people. Performing simultaneously, you had, Tenors Rock. You had, this is all around. You had, at the Mirage, you had Love by Cirque du Soleil. All around him. Undisputed Truth at the MGM. That's what the African Americans were. You had Mike Tyson with the Undisputed Truth. Pardon me, not the band. Golden Knights hockey there at T-Mobile Arena. All of these in close proximity. Actually, with where he was perched on the 32nd floor. He can get a shot. Of course, on the side he was in a suite, by the way. Because there's two broken windows. It looks like he broke it there by the living room and then in one of the bedrooms, and he actually had a video camera up filming him doing this. Really want to know more about that. See, let's see. Harris had the tennis rock. Okay. So, he chose this perch, and he has been known to go to country western concerts, and this is based upon what we've heard. You know, I always, when I look at this, I look at the target. Was there a target? Was it, he was behind the band, so it wasn't the band. He's behind the stage there. Maybe he was aiming at someone else? I do. I always think that maybe somehow or another with these losers, there's something else going on. I knew that it was not a guy who had been in the military because he was using very long bursts with what seemed to be an automatic weapon. Those in the military, well, those who know how to fire an automatic weapon understand you use very short bursts. You don't have a lot of control. You know, you want to do very brief bursts because it's, number one, it's several reasons. Number one, you don't have good aim. He didn't have to aim much then, but, you know, controlling the weapon becomes a problem. Even controlling the temperature on the barrel becomes a problem. Absolutely. Even jamming in the magazine becomes an issue. So you use very brief bursts. I think I shared that with you yesterday, bro. But there's something else here. You know, I think, ladies and gentlemen, there is a problem with the victimization, particularly of Caucasian males. I do. I'm willing to talk about it. I am. But there's a pattern going on. Not only inside of the Caucasian family, whereby Caucasian fathers have been killing their wives and children at a clip. And sometimes it's a matter after raping their daughters. Look, I'm just calling it what it is, folks. You want me to... I'm an equal opportunity, honest opinion giver. You want to talk about African Americans shooting up African Americans in Chicago, you can't ignore this. This is the problem. There's something happening here. You don't think so? Well, just listen to this. So we just had this shooting. And I personally feel it was a terrorist attack because there were social objectives, given the fact that he chose to be there. I think so. Planned to be there. And planned to be elsewhere. I mean, with the number of firearms, what he had now 14, 18 there at his house, and then maybe just as many there in the apartment, and explosives, a nitrate there at his house, and had a gun stand. Pretty serious. But just listen at the number of times you've had this demographic participate in what I call terrorist attacks. And there's some reason that the others don't want to call it that. I don't know why. August 12th, 2017, Caucasian white supremacist named James Fields Jr. Last time you hear his name. This is for there in Charlottesville. Remember this? This is where the Unite the Right got together, and he decided to drive his car into a crowd, killing one female protester out of the blue. Earlier that year, May 26, 2017, 2 men are stabbed to death on a light rail train in Portland, Oregon by an unknown local white supremacist. His name, Jeremy Joseph Christian. You heard me right. I said unknown, by a known local white supremacist. Then you've got March 20th, same year, 2017, this year. 28-year-old white supremacist named James Harris Jackson stabbed 66-year-old African-American stranger there in Manhattan. Remember him? And then last year, August, 38-year-old Oregon man with connection to white supremacist prison gangs drove over and killed a 19-year-old African-American man after a sidewalk altercation in what authorities are prosecuting right now as a hate crime. 2015, 57-year-old religious fanatic named Robert Louis Deere shoots and kills 3 people there, including a police officer at Planned Parenthood in Colorado. He too had come through a white supremacist environment, found God. Same year, July 2015, John Russell Hauser, 59 years old, history of expressing extremist anti-feminist beliefs, kills 2 women at a screening there at the Army, where is this, in Louisiana? Or at the Amy Schumer comedy deal. This is the guy there in Louisiana. Oh, yeah. It's the guy. Needless to say, the Charleston shooter, remember him? Don't call his name. That happened also same year, white supremacist. Eric Ferrin allegedly shoots and kills a Pennsylvania state trooper. I said allegedly. He's being tried now. That was 2014. Do you know that none of these guys were called terrorists? No, really. I mean, President Barack Obama referred to the Charlottesville terrorists as a terrorist, but no one else did. I mean, it was just not something that I wonder why. All of these Caucasian individuals, I might add. And then Jared and Amanda Miller, remember them from the Bundy Ranch? Well, they just decided to go in Nevada there and kill a police officer. What was the objective? Well, to kill police officers while they were eating pizza. They did. Fraser Miller, 73 years old, long history in the KKK. Kills 3 people in a Jewish community center, but they weren't Jewish. He was, and no one wanted to refer to him as terrorist. That's what he said. Heil Hitler. Thank you very much. And then Jared, you remember Jared Loughner? All these folks are also looked upon as being crazy. There's something wrong with them. They had some psychological problem. They said the same thing about Gabby, the shooter of Gabby Giffords. And James Holmes, in the theater. Of course, he was seeing a therapist, but needless to say, he also was more than livid enough to be able to plan out the caper of having Kevlar vest on and breaking into the rear of the theater and looking like the Joker and having a good alibi. I mean, folks, this goes all the way back. I mean, when I look at this, I've got 3 pages here. All of these same MO. And not one of these do I see where it's considering them as terrorists. White supremacist named Wade Mitchell Page killed 6 people at the Sikh temple. Remember him? That was in 2012. Still not a terrorist act. You see, I think that there's something going on, and that something that's going on bothers me. and it should bother most Americans, Caucasian, African American, or alike. There is this softening up based upon what I call whiteism, not racism. I don't know if of law enforcement or of others, there is this empathy that goes out to the Caucasian male as a victim in total, because after all, African Americans took their rights from him. That's the illusion. I'm seeing this. Now, look, I'm not vilifying most Caucasians, I think, don't see it this way. I really do. But I think that those individuals are at the top. Do you notice the speed in which there was he's a lone gunman, lone wolf, and it was within 10 hours we were hearing the actual video of the audio of the breaching of his room. I mean, it was just such a, there was, the FBI hadn't even been called in. ATF hadn't even been called in by that time. There was this rush. I'm still very curious as to both of the windows being broke out and whether or not he had someone else working with him on this. Now, supposedly there are some videos. This is a very curious situation. But what's not curious is how there is this, it's a horrible thing, it's an evil thing, but he's not a terrorist. Now, I'm of the opinion that there's no doubt that there are those who are seeking to make terrorists synonymous with being Muslim or brown or whatever. I know that. But my reason is not to go, oh yeah, why can't they be? That's not my concern. My greatest concern is this, is that by America doing it this way and having this skin privilege, should I say, as to who's a terrorist and who's not, it's creating an environment that is very deadly for all of us. Terrorism is as terrorism does. It just is. And I do feel that a Caucasian would resent being called a terrorist, someone who's contemplating that. I'm just telling you. I'm no terrorist. I'm a shooter. I'm a mass murderer, but I'm no terrorist. Terrorists are Muslims and brown people. I'm not. What I'm saying is that law enforcement, you guys need to be the ones talking up here about this. Now, but by my saying that is not some tit for tat. It's not some, oh yeah, they're going to Rick Daniels again talking about race. No. What I'm talking about is the safety of all of us. Bullets kill. I don't care what gun it comes from and what finger pulls it. But this kind of, okay, let's give some reasonable explanation as to why the white boy, in quotes, would shoot somebody or do something like this. He's a fine guy, and we have no idea. Harris and Clebo were terrorists. They were, and you didn't say they were. Now you've got people glorifying them. You don't find nearly as many Caucasian males, particularly, wanting to do this when they're referred to as a terrorist. Really? Have you wrong? I'm just not. My reasons for saying this is the same reasons I won't call their names out, because it kind of glorifies them. But I think being placed on that list of individuals who perform terrorist, even the Charlotte terrorist doesn't want to be called that. He's a warrior for God. He's going to start the race war, and I'm no terrorist. I defended the white race. I'm telling you. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means that he was performing jihad. If you were to read what ISIS or Osama bin Laden or anybody else would say, that's what that is. It is going on his own war. It is declaring jihad against anyone. He's just not speaking the language. Same stuff. Same stuff. I mean, as I look at this long list, I mean, this is a long list. You can't read it because it's a mirror image here, you guys who watch it. You can find this on the long list of killings committed by white extremists since the Oklahoma City bombing. See, right here. Just pull that up and then you will see what I have. But missing from that list is James Holmes and Jared Loughner. I wonder why. Well, many of these individuals were considered the same, to be quite frank. All right, folks, but that's just part of my hypothesis about what's going on. I think it spills over into what we're experiencing with the NFL. There's some kind of Caucasian male victimization, and now there's got to be a striking back, and when one goes off the deep end and becomes extremist, then there's an explanation given. Such was the case that Donald John gave with the neo-Nazis. And I just rattled off at least 5 neo-Nazi sympathizers or neo-Nazis who'd kill Americans. Who would want to be that unless you were anti-American? But now they're trying to promote this Intifada thing. There's no Intifada. I mean, just come off of it. You know, you've got those who support America who are against the Nazis and the Klan and the Confederates, and then you've got the Confederates and the Klan. Which side are you on? But I think that there is this, with the election of Donald John, it's confirmed in my mind that there is this, there is this striking back and giving an explanation, providing an explanation for why, poor Caucasian males have got it hard. I mean, they took their jobs, want to feed their families, and it's enough to make a guy go to the 32nd floor and kill up a bunch of Caucasians. And look, I'm telling you, there are those who would say the same thing about Ruby Ridge or the assault there, Branch Davidians there in Texas. There are those who see it. And when I say that, these are the extremists. Particularly when you see the response that Donald John gave, which brings me to this NFL thing. I think all of this plays into it. You do realize that 99.9% of the football players, particularly the 7-8% African American football players. That's what the NFL is composed of, about 78% African American players. You do realize most of those guys, 99.9% of them were standing up and put their hands on the chest before Donald John opened his big pie hole there in Alabama. I like that. I adopted that from a redneck, pie hole. Shut your pie hole. Yeah. That's kind of disgusting, isn't it? But at any rate, I thought it was cool. So he opens his big trap and then says he'll fire someone. Now, keeping in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Colin Kaepernick was fired. He wasn't hired. I'm just saying. So he says this, knowing this, and by the way, you only had 1, 2, or 3 individuals who were still continuing to take a knee, and so this guy comes out and says this, and he said it for political reasons, and some of you were manipulated just as sure as I'm looking at you. Some of you fell for that. You know why you fell for it? Because you bought into that concept that those trifling Negroes out there are taking over the NFL. I've had the emails from you guys. What do you call it? Nigger football league? I can only use that word. Yeah, I got it. I received it. Didn't respond. I know what kind of person you are. Oh, yeah. And there is this thought here that's born out of, again, this contradiction of white supremacy. Now, here you have, ladies and gentlemen, you realize that football, like any kind of combat, should I say, among men, goes all the way back to mankind competition and warfare. I mean, when you look at what's happening in the Olympics, it was born out of the preparation of those warriors for war. The swordsmanship, the wrestling, the confrontation, pitting muscle against muscle, be it in Greece, be it in Rome, be it in Egypt, all had their games in preparation. And when they didn't have war, they wanted to maintain their skills, and then they was competing with each other. So you had the best of the best warriors getting out in the arena like gladiators, like football. And they became men's men, the strongest, the most agile, the sharpest, one who can throw the spear, one who could land on his feet. They were admired by everyone. They were warriors. And that's what has now happened in the arena. Every arena comes Sunday or Monday in America. And when it's dominated by African Americans, and what did that say about the abilities of those strong bucks now? I'm just saying. Particularly now that they're becoming, they're quarterbacks after all. Used to be some great joke about that quarterback thing. When you call one white guy with 10 other black guys, oh, football team. All right? The offensive team, all right? Offense. Yeah, that's what it was. So I do think that there is this backlash right now happening within the NFL, primarily born out of the fact that it is dominated by African Americans in superior positions, particularly on the field, and it's giving a bad impression for those who would think that white is supremacist, physically and mentally. I mean, heaven forbid. I mean, you've got African American president now, and that has just really contradicted our thought of what's supposed to happen, and so now there's this backlash. I've got to get the Michelin Man to Donald John or Mr. Clean, to now go into the White House because they clean this mess up. It is a contradiction here. I do feel, ladies and gentlemen, that you're getting this from this loser wretched type who feels deep down inside not too confident in himself, particularly around a Rip Daniels or a Rowe or a Leroy. I don't know why it is, but you've got some who simply measure themselves by where they think I should be. I ran into it when I went to integrated school at Gulfport East. playing chess and learning and beating someone it was tough. It was tough. You know, it was, I mean, it was like, how could you know that? There were those who, I mean, I'm just telling you because they were taught all this time of being the smartest and the biggest and the best and the fastest So I think that's what you're getting now, America. I think you're getting two things. I think you're getting a low esteemed Caucasian male who is now retaliating even at his own. Because he's not where he thinks he should be. He's comparing himself with others. He's become vain or realizes that he's a loser, so therefore we'll take everybody with me, including his family in some cases. You've got that, and then you've got this other class of people who feel that he was a victim. He was put upon. To all this affirmative actions and civil rights stuff, I mean, poor George, I'd go off too. You drove him to this. You drove him to it. You took him out of the coal mines. You did this. The Negroes took his date. He's impotent. Suffering from some kind of penis envy that he can't cure, but it's just a freak of nature. He has nothing to define himself because now he can't put Rip Daniels down. I think I'll go kill somebody. We'll be back.